All right, if you're looking to understand how the data validation function works in Microsoft Excel, look no further. In this lesson, we're going to go through from start to finish a few examples of how to use the data validation function within Microsoft Excel, which can be very useful if you're someone who uses Excel on a frequent basis. Let's say you work in accounting, finance, you're doing financial modeling, etc. So what are the typical use cases for data validation? Data validation is used as a function within Excel to control what data and values a user can enter into a cell or a range of cells. It can be used as a function to create pick lists, to create predefined lists that someone can choose from. For example, using a data validation pick list, we can ensure that certain drop-down cells are used to populate a form. Additionally, the data validation tool can be used for other purposes to ensure that a particular cell in our spreadsheet contains only a value from, let's say, 1 to 10, or a particular date, or even other data that you'd like someone to fill out, but restrict the types of responses that they can provide. So let's go through a couple of examples here. In the first example, I'm going to show you how to create a pick list using the data validation function within Microsoft Excel. So the first step in creating a pick list in Excel is to make a list somewhere in the workbook of the items that you want to be contained within the pick list as options. So for example, we've got the below items here that we want to use to create a pick list. I've got a list of different accounts here. So let's say I am prospecting a certain industry and I want to make a list of the different industries or whatever it may be. I can make a list of brand types, industries, types of software, types of hardware, types of products that I sell, locations, sales reps, whatever you want to put in. In this example here, I've got a total of 14 different items that I want to be contained within my pick list. As you can see, I wrote out each of them here in a single column, starting with entertainment, printing and stationery, insurance premium, traveling allowance, and so on. The next step that you want to do in order to create the pick list with the data validation function, I'm going to go to the top navigation menu and I'm going to click on data and then data validation. And then once I click on data validation, I'm going to click on the allow section and I'm going to click the drop down that appears there and I'm going to click on list. Once I click on list, you can see that the source appears. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the top of the pick list that I had created, which is on the screen here in cells C16 through C29. So I'm going to basically just click on the first cell and then I'm going to press and hold shift and then I'm going to click on cell C29. And what that's going to do is it's going to highlight the entire list that I want to be part of my pick list. As you can see on the option screen here, there's the ability to ignore blank cells. Let's say that I had clicked cells C16 through C30. If I did that, you'd notice that cell C30 is blank, and I wouldn't want that to be part of my pick list. So in that case, I would want to ensure that the check mark is on for ignore blanks. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK now that I've got the source selected for my pick list. And as you can see, cell E15 now turns into a pick list, and I've got different options that are available here. I can pick from any of them: entertainment, printing and stationery, and so on. So that's it. That's all you need to do to create a very simple pick list within Microsoft Excel. It's not hard at all. And now I've got, a pick list, and I can actually copy that pick list and paste it in a different area. I'm just going to hold and press Control C here, and I'm going to move it to cell G20, and then I'm going to use Control V to paste it in cell G20, and as you can see, the pick list is now in cell G20, and it's referencing the original table, which is in cells C16 through C29. But what if you wanted to create a scenario where you want to insert a pick list into multiple cells? Well, you could either copy the pick list that we just created and paste it down into multiple cells, Or another way to do it is to insert your pick list by highlighting a column and then applying the steps that we just took to create the pick list. And the benefit of that is it's more practical if you've already got a big table that's set up and you don't want to copy down a pick list into all of the cells, and then that could, potentially alter the formatting. Let's go and take a look at that as an example. As you can see down here, we've got a table of data for Hammerhead USA, and we've got a bunch of different columns here. And what I want to do is I want to insert the type drop-down list into the type column here. As you can see, it actually is already set up here as a pick list. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete it. I'm going to delete all of the pick list that already is set up by highlighting it and then pressing delete. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to highlight it, and then I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to click on data validation. I'm going to choose list. And for my source data, I'm going to choose the list that I had created at the top of the screen here. So cells C16 through cells C29. And then I'm just going to click OK. And because I had that entire table highlighted in column F when I performed that data validation, the pick list should now be applied to each of the cells in column F. Let's go ahead and take a look. As you can see, there's now an option for me to choose the pick list data from cells F63 through F103. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and start populating all of this data just based on the description that appears in column G. And maybe that's something that you want to do if you've got a situation where you have a table and you need that table populated by type, but you're not really familiar with the descriptions in the table. You're just doing the project management behind populating some of this information and getting it ready, and you need input from different departments or different users. What you could do is you could insert this drop-down option in column F, and then you could send it to the other individuals who need to fill it in and tell them to just choose an item from the drop-down. And that way, it controls the input of what they're going to enter, and you're not going to get erroneous information. Let's say they type in printing or they type in print. Those are both the same things. If you want to be one generic category, the way in which you can circumvent having two different options for the same thing is by having a pick list available to them that they have to choose from. They can't type in the cell. They need to choose from the pick list and pick a relevant option. Let's take a look at another example for data validation within Microsoft Excel. In this second example, we're going to create a data validation rule where only whole numbers are allowed and they must be between 0 and 10. This can be useful if you're sending out a workbook with a questionnaire to a group of people, or if you have a financial model which requires an input for a what-if scenario, but the input must be restricted to a certain number range. So if you take a look at the screen here, we've got an example where we're asking through a questionnaire, how many cups of coffee do you drink each day? And the cell G113 is an input cell. It's blue. And it's restricted such that you can only enter in numbers. You can't enter in text. Additionally, you can't use numbers that have decimals. And if an invalid response is entered, i.e. a whole number is not entered, then we set it up so that a data validation error appears. And the data validation error that we want to appear is too much caffeine. So we can test that out by entering in something that's not conforming to those specifications in cell G113 below. So let's type in the word the and press enter. And as you can see, there's a message that appears that says too much caffeine, which is the error message that I wanted to appear. And so it won't let me input that. What if I try to input 4.1? I get the same error message. What if I were to enter the number 6? If I enter 6, things are fine because 6 is a whole number, and that's the way in which I set up the data validation. So let me show you how I set up this validation. This is just one example. Of course, you can set the parameters however you wish. You can do it so that it's based on numbers or it's based on words. It's really up to you. So the steps are as follows. Select the cell where you want the data validation rule to be applied. In this case, it's cell G113. Next on the Data tab, we're going to go to Data Validation, and then we're going to click on Data Validation again. And in the Allow list, you want to select whole number. So you can see there's a bunch of different options for data validation in the Allow pick list. We had already gone through an example with list. Now we're going to choose a whole number. So I click on whole number, and in the data dropdown, there are some options, and you can really select whatever specifications you'd like for your criteria. In this case, I want to allow only the numbers between 0 and 10. So the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 10. And the way in which this will work is if you try to enter a decimal, it's not going to work because it's not a whole number. And if you input a negative number, it's not going to work. Or if you input a number that exceeds 10, i.e. 11 or thereafter, it'll present an error. On the next tab, we can see that I am allowing for an error message to appear on the error alert tab, and on the input message, it indicates what the steps are. So in this case, I want to title the input cell to be cups of coffee. And if you were to hover over it, it's going to say, please enter a whole number between 0 and 10. And you can see that right now we have cell G113 selected. And when you hover over it, there's a pop-up box that appears, which prompts the user and gives them instructions on what to enter into that cell. So please enter a whole number between 0 and 10. The error message that I want to appear, as you previously saw when I entered in something that was not appropriate, is too much caffeine, and you can customize this to be whatever you want. So I'm going to click OK, and again, if I were to enter 11, I'm going to get the error message. If I enter 10, it's fine because it's within the data validation range. So in this workbook here, I've also included steps on how to achieve what we just discussed, inputting a specific message on hover and having an error alert appear when the inaccurate or invalid data is entered into the cell where you want people to input data. Let's move on to a third example for data validation using dates. So in this example using dates, we can specify a cell or a range of cells to allow only a particular date or time to be entered. So consider an example where we only want date ranges from, let's say, December 31st going back to December 1st. And we only want to allow people to input dates associated within that range. Let's say you have a function, let's say you have a product launch date or start dates. You only want people to input dates within that specific period within December of 2019. Well, you can do that similar to the way in which we set up the other validation rule for whole numbers, but in this case, we're going to do it based on dates, and we're not going to allow for there to be an input outside of that range. So let's review how we're going to do that. First, I'm going to click on cell G203, and as I hover over it, you can see that I created an input message that says, please enter a date pertaining to December 2019. And then if I go to data validation and click on data validation again, I can go to settings, and as you see, the allow pick list is set to date. The data is set to between because I want to allow dates to be inputted between two specific dates, i.e. December 1st, 2019 as the start date and December 31st, 2019 as the end date. On the input message tab, I can see that I inputted a input message of please enter a date pertaining to December 2019. And the error alert, as you can see on the screen here, says only dates pertaining to December 2019 can be added. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to try to type in December 31st, 2019. I should be able to do it, and it lets me. But what if I type in January 1st, 2020? I should be able to get an error message from this type of input. And as you can see, an error message appears, and my data validation rule is working perfectly fine. Let's move on to a fourth example, using time. So in this example, let's consider an attendance sheet where we want the attendance to be marked between 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the blue cell below, and not to allow an input outside of this range. We need a data validation rule that restricts the entry in cell E249 to time between 8 and 9 a.m. and one which displays an error message to consult the HR manager if the input is entered outside of this range. So what are the steps that we're going to take to do this? Well, it's really simple within Microsoft Excel. All the data validation configuration is done within the same section. So I'm going to click on the cell E249. I'm going to click on data validation, click on data validation again. And on the settings tab, I'm going to choose time from the allow pick list. I'm going to choose between, and I'm going to input the start date and time of 8 a.m. and end time of 9 a.m. On the input message screen, I don't have anything written right now, but I can input here, please input time between 8 o'clock a.m. and 9 o'clock a.m. for attendance. I'm going to also have an alert that says unable to mark attendance. Attendance can only be marked between 8 and 9 a.m. Please email HR for late attendance entry. So that's just an example where if someone's arriving late, they can't input a time subsequent to 9 a.m. Let's say the door's closed. They'll have to contact HR for attendance entry into the timesheet at a later time. So I'm going to click OK. Let's hover over the cell E249. And as you can see, there's an input message that appears here that says, please input time between 8 and 9 a.m. for attendance. If I try to put in 8:30 a.m., that works. And let's see if I type in 9:01 a.m. As you can see, I get an error message on screen as expected, which says attendance can only be marked between 8 and 9 a.m. Please email HR for late attendance entry. So things appear to be working fine with our data validation rules. Notice that in this case, we set up the configuration a little bit different. So in our data validation, you'll notice that there's actually a few options available here. You'll notice that when I typed in 9:01 a.m., I received a prompt which said that the time entered was outside of the 8 to 9 a.m. range. I clicked OK, but it still allowed me to enter that time within the cell. And the reason for that is because there's different configuration I set up on this data validation rule compared to the last ones. And I'll show you what the options are. So I'm going to click on data validation and I'm going to go to the error alert. And in this case, I chose the style information. So there's three different styles here. You can choose stop. And if I were to choose stop, then it wouldn't let me input 9:01 a.m. It would just prompt me that there was an error and wouldn't allow me to continue. There's warning and information. So let's see what happens under each of those. Let's put in stop. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go back to 8 o'clock a.m. And let's say I want to put in 9:01 a.m. now. And in this case, I get a stop error alert that says attendance can only be marked between 8 and 9 a.m. Please email HR for late attendance entry. I can retry, but it won't work. I have to cancel. So in that case, it does not let me enter a time outside of the time range specified. But if I were to go back to data validation and change the style to say information, then it's going to let me input 9:01 a.m. and click OK, but it's still going to give me that error alert and just give me a notification. So there's a couple different ways in which you can do it. A hard stop or there's a soft stop with information purposes. Let's try the warning. So I'm going to go back to data validation. I'm going to click on warning as the style. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to change the date back to 8 o'clock a.m., which is within the range. I'm not getting an error message there, but what if I were to type in 7:59 a.m.? Well, in this case, I'm getting a warning. I can still click yes, and I can continue with inputting the 7:59 a.m., or even let's put in 9:01 a.m. I'm going to get a warning and I can click yes and I can continue. So the data validation error message for warning and information work in a similar fashion. It's just a difference in the symbol icon that appears, but it'll still allow you to allow users to input character that is outside of the desired range. The only one that restricts completely the user from being able to input a value outside the range is the stop style. Let's move on to a fifth and final example. When I scroll down here, I can see the fifth and final example that we have for data validation using custom formula. The data validation rule allows for a custom validation rule to be created with a formula. For example, assume we're planning for our 2021 budget year and we want a budget for marketing spend by category. Marketing spend is limited to $400,000 a year. The formula that we used in the data validation rule is as follows. We locked the cell range D309 through D315, which is the sum of the marketing budget here in column D. We've got performance marketing on Google, Facebook, other, we've got partnerships, event marketing, conferences, and SEO. All of that is equal to 384,000. So how does this work? Well, let's say you want to give someone a spreadsheet and you want them to be able to populate the budget, but the budget has certain restrictions. In this case, we don't want the budget to exceed $400,000 because that's the marketing budget for the year. And if we were to give this to the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer, and say, hey, fill in your budget for the year or for the next quarter, whatever it may be, and by the way, your budget is restricted to $400,000, but I want a line item detailed report, you can actually help them to restrict the line items and make sure that they fall within the budget. And this is just a simplistic example. You can apply this on a more broader scale and create a whole workbook with different departments set up with their individual budgets that roll up to a master operating budget. But let's say I were to enter a dollar amount into performance marketing Google that pushed the total marketing budget outside of that $400,000 boundary. Right now, it's restricted on aggregate to $400,000. So I'm going to input $50,000 here and we'll see what happens. As you can see, I get an error message that says you can't exceed your budget limit of $400,000. And if I try to continue, it allows me to, and that's because in the error message, it was an informational error only. Now, of course, I could change that, but let's just highlight this entire range here. I'm going to show you the steps that you need to take in order to modify the data validation and set up that data validation rule. The first thing you want to do is select the range of the table where you want to set the restriction. In this case, it's the marketing budget cells 309 through D315. So once I have the cells selected, I'm going to click on the Data tab at the top in the navigation pane, and then I'm going to click on Data Validation, and then I'm going to click on Data Validation again, and I'm going to go to Settings. I'm going to allow a custom formula to be used, right, from the Allow Pick list. I'm going to use Custom this time, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to input my formula that I want to use as a restriction. In this case, I'm using a sum formula that says equals sum of cells D309 through cells D315, and I'm inputting and I'm specifying that it must be less than or equal to $400,000. So that's my data validation rule. On the input message, I don't have anything set up, but I'm going to put in marketing budget, and then I'm going to specify here, please fill in the marketing budget line items, spend amounts, and ensure the total budget does not exceed $400,000. I'm also going to go to the error tab here, and as we saw previously, it was set up with a warning. I'm actually going to change that to stop because I don't want them to input anything that would push the budget outside of its $400,000 boundary. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And as you can see, now when I hover over cells D309 through D315, we've got some guidance that appears that says, please fill in the marketing budget, line items, spend amounts, and ensure the total budget does not exceed $400,000. So if I were to delete what's in the performance marketing Google budget line item, if I highlight everything else, I can see we've got a total budgeted spend amount of $364,000 now. But what would push that over the $400,000 mark? Well, first let's put in $20,000 and make sure that I can do that. There's no issue with that. As you can see, total budget is now $384,000. But what if I were to enter $50,000 into the performance marketing Google budget line item. As you can see, I get an error stop message that says you cannot exceed your budget limit of $400,000, and I can click retry, but I get the same message, and so the only option is to cancel, and I'll have to adjust my budget in order to be able to finalize it. That brings us to the end of our data validation exercises here. As you can imagine, there are a lot of different ways in which you can set up data validations within Microsoft Excel. We touched on a few of them in this course. The list, the whole number, the date, the time, the custom. There's also a couple others here, text length, decimal, etc. And then within each of those, you can set different parameters on how you want the data validation rule to really work. And I think there's a lot of flexibility using the custom data validation rule, given that you can set your own formula. Again, in our case, we used a sum formula with it being less than or equal to $400,000. You can, of course, use your own financial formula within Excel to create certain data validation restrictions, create your own input messages and alerts. And overall, it's just a very helpful way to make sure that you have control over a worksheet if you need that. Hey guys, thanks for watching this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe from you. And if you want to learn more about Microsoft Excel, check out these videos above. And don't forget to check out our website, commercecurve.com, where we have lots of in-depth finance and accounting courses available with full training workbooks. All of our courses come with complete workbooks of lessons, examples, pre-built financial models, and training video. Hope to see you there.